How's it going? So today I'm off my mom duties. So my dad's out visiting her in the hospital, rehab center. So I'm at home, and as I said in the last video, I kind of look around to see if I can hold on to anything that kind of makes me feel a bit better. And one thing that has always been there for me ever since I discovered it or really got into it is music. And I guess I would talk about one of the bands that I've loved the longest, but maybe I don't listen to very much these days, at least not the new stuff, is U2. Um, I think I was probably about 12, 13 when I started to listen to them. And I think I kind of enjoyed them because they were very different than anything that I had heard. I largely grew up in the 80s listening to things that my parents listened to. So that would be stuff like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the very early Rolling Stones, not the heavily drug influenced stuff of the 70s, but usually like the 60s stuff like Satisfaction and Get Off of My Cloud and all that. And then I think as you get to be past the age of 10, maybe up to like 11 or 12, you start, I guess it's middle school. There might be some sort of psychological thing kicking in where in elementary school you are sort of, your teacher is much like your mother or father in the sense that you're with them all the time. All of my elementary school teachers, with the exception of like the PE teacher, you did all of that stuff with your elementary school teacher. You did reading, you did math, you did spelling, you did science, you did it all. Whatever. Geez, it's been so long since I've been there that I barely remember it. But I do recall you just have a very mom or dad like feeling towards your teacher, because you're with this person for hours upon hours on end every single day, and they know you backwards and forwards, and they're much smarter than you because they're an adult and you're a stupid kid. So they know your personality, know when you're lying. They probably the crazy thing is they probably see you more than they see their own family, their own children. I've actually known a couple of people who were in the same school as their parent who was a teacher, and I think in the case of at least in a an elementary school environment, they did not want their kid to be in their own classroom. Probably because they didn't want to end up hating their kid. But so anyway, when you go into middle school, you have several teachers. I mean, from that point forward, it's the same throughout high school. It's the same throughout college, that you have many teachers, and each one teaches you a subject: math, science, different types of sciences, right? Physics, chemistry, biology, all of it. They all have their own specialty, and they teach it to you. And you maybe see them. We had something called block scheduling at my high school, where you would go to a class every other day, but the classes themselves were about an hour and a half long. I think largely that was there to accommodate science classes who had to run experiments, let's say in physics, where you don't have enough time to take attendance, go over homework, and then do a chemistry lab. It just takes a while to start up the chemistry, to explain the experiment, to do it, to write up the experiment, and then talk about it. You just can't do that in about 45 minutes. So I'm not sure how many schools do that. But anyway, the point is that when you have this sort of environment, the teacher is not really the guiding force in your schooling, at least sort of emotionally, or there's a saying that you are the average of 5 people that you spend the most time with. And obviously, this is probably intensified by the intensity of the personality. So if you spend time with somebody who doesn't really talk very much, you're probably not going to pick up a lot of habits off of them other than not talking very much. Yet the teacher is sort of a parental figure in elementary school. So he or she guides you through the process. I say he or she because I actually had a couple male teachers when I was in elementary school, and which was interesting. But most of them tend to be female. But I guess I had one teacher back in elementary school. I think it was fourth grade. He was. I get the impression now that he was a very sarcastic person, but for a 9 or 10-year-old, that's a little bit over their head, especially if you can hide it well. So anyway, as you get into middle school, you start to get older, you get more interested in other people rather than, you develop your own personality yourself. You get a little bit more freedom. You don't have the teacher watching over you all the time. And you get exposed to music. And music, as well as other things, movies, you get this freedom. I don't know if it's like this anymore because, let's face it, it must be way worse to be a child now than it was 20, 30 years ago. I don't really remember my parents being around very much. I mean, they would just kind of leave me to it. If you wanted to hang out with us, fine, you hang out with it. My parents. If I wanted to hang out with them, I would hang out with them. And I just don't remember them telling me to do this or that, other than like, you have this thing you want to do. Like I played basketball and I played a bunch of different sports, and they would just get on top of me, mostly just to keep my schedule going. I wasn't a very busy child, but I did do basketball, soccer a little bit. Never really caught on to soccer very much. Basketball I loved. I did judo, and my parents were just like, okay, you want to do this, you got to do your homework. Because if practice is at night, you're not going to practice unless you do your homework. So that's sort of a little carrot that they can dangle in front of you to get you to do something. But they didn't really make me do it. And eventually I lost interest in organized sports, mostly because I developed interest in music, right? And so I started playing guitar. I just became obsessive about music, and I think that sort of started when I went to middle school. And so this was probably early to mid 90s. So I'm 39 now. I'll be 40 in 2 months. And I remember, so this was early to mid 90s, and it was a great time to be alive. I think you had so many great bands around. A lot of them didn't survive because, unfortunately, the great bands also had great problems, and half of them ended up killing themselves or in jail or, too strung out to get an album going. So they just kind of floundered. U2 was one of the few bands that just kind of, they didn't really do drugs. I'm sure they drink. They're Irish. If I know Irish people, they can drink, but they don't really, who knows? I'm sure they have drug problems there, but not U2. And they were different. They weren't afraid to, it didn't seem like they cared too much what people thought of them. Not in the sense they didn't want people to like them or wanted people not to like them. It's just they did whatever was on their mind, and, they just dealt with the consequences of that later. And so and this is around the time that it started becoming cheaper to buy CDs. When a little bit before that, CDs were actually very expensive. I remember my parents buying me a CD, and it was like $20. $20 in the early 90s. That must be about, God knows, the inflation right now. It was ridiculous. Having a CD player was like, oh, we've made it, I'm sure there's an equivalent of that now, but it wasn't something you took lightly. If somebody had a lot of CDs in their house, they were either a music nut or they were loaded. But eventually the prices of CDs dropped down to where even a child could spend his allowance on them. And I started doing that with all kinds of music. So early 90s, I listened to a lot of stuff. I still listen to a lot of stuff my parents listened to, especially my mom. I actually got into the harder stuff. So like maybe they dropped off when they were like 18. So this mid 60s to late 70s. So they kind of solidified them. I started listening to bands like Led Zeppelin, like Pink Floyd, which my parents don't know anything about. And I also started listening to U2. And U2, to me, we've never been a religious family. We've gone to church periodically throughout my childhood. I suppose I could talk about that some other time, but I never really felt, especially as a child, that like religion was that important to anyone in my immediate family. A lot of the older generation, my mom's side, were very religious, the Catholic. So I knew about Catholicism. My mom she had a bad experience as a child, and she didn't want to throw that at me. So I remember listening to some of this music, and if you listen to U2, some of it's very blatantly religious, but not like Christian rock. I honestly, I was thinking, before I started this, I started going through like a list of the discography on Wikipedia, and I started thinking like, there's actually a lot of religious stuff here. And I just couldn't make the difference between U2's religious stuff. So I'll give you an example. There's a song called 40, which is basically a repackaging of Psalm 40. And if you read it in the Bible, it's like, okay, they just totally lifted this. God knows what translation of the Bible that they were using, but you're like, okay, this is directly from the 40th Psalm. And then you listen to another song called Tomorrow. I really liked it because at this time I was also starting to get into Irish folk music and just any kind of Irish things. My family had always kind of maintained at least a cultural tie to Ireland, even though family members over there, you're now 2 or 3 generations removed from Ireland. You don't know who these people are. You know what city that your family came from, but you didn't really... the connection had pretty much been severed. But the love for the country had not. That was something instilled in you, as well as some of your family's pet hatreds for neighbors of Ireland. But, you just learn to ignore that. Listening to Tomorrow, you have this uilleann pipe, which is sort of like an Irish bagpipe, but it sounds so much nicer. It's so much less... The bagpipes can be fairly obnoxious unless you're doing some sort of tattoo march or something like that. But they can be pretty obnoxious because when they sound bad, they sound bad. But an uilleann pipe, when played really well, it sounds really nice. I'm sure that they have an equivalent somewhere in the Middle East, because it does have that sort of vibrating sound. And I really just love that song, and it's obviously a song about his mother's funeral. And he repeats, I believe that Jesus is coming. Basically, it was sort of like a religious experience, losing your mother. And I was thought, and I just kept going through the discography this morning. I saw, Till the End of the World. I always knew that it was a recounting of Judas's experience with Jesus at the Garden of Gethsemane. Basically the agony in the garden, and what Bono probably imagined would happen to Judas after he had betrayed Jesus. And there's I just made a short list, and there's loads of it. There's Wake Up Dead Man. That's an obvious one. I really enjoyed that. And the songs that are religious, or at least have religious undertones, are really the most beautiful songs. And I'm looking at If God Will Send His Angels, and I was listening to that song. I was like, there's a giant disconnect between religion in the world. And I was thinking about this, when I first started reading Aristotle's Ethics, and I read parts of the Bible simultaneously or around the same time, and I started noticing that there's a lot of parallels between these two. That there's this sort of ideal form of things that you could probably attribute to Plato that just doesn't show up in the world. He believed in these sort of ideal forms of things. So if you look at this remote control, this is a physical example of a remote control. It's not the only one. Here's another one, right? And they have the qualities of remote control, but what is the ultimate, there are differences. So something is inherent in this and this, but the shape obviously is not that big of a deal. The color, this one has a bit of a gray background, and this one has mostly black. This one kind of lights up when you press it. This one's made by a different company. But anyway, the point is that I think they run off of different batteries too. The point is that there's a disconnect between the ideal form, the remote controlledness of remote control that doesn't really show up in the real world. And likewise, I think when you're talking about ethics, there's a disconnect between what people believe is a good person, is a good thing, and what people do. And if you're convinced of this, that something's a good thing, yet you don't do it, what the hell is going on here? And I think this song called If God Will Send His Angels is it's just kind of like, you walk around in the street, and there's a line in there that really kind of hits me. It's basically the high street never looks so low. Now, this is a British-Irish expression that we call it Main Street. The high street, the high street shops that's kind of like a British term for like mom and pop shop. The high street is sort of the center of small towns, or not large ones, but ultimately every town has a high street. And you walk around, and this is supposed to be the best part of town, and it just looks so run down. And it's because we're not living up to our values or the things that we hold important. And if God will send his angels, we could sure use them here right now. The Cartoon Network turns into the news. Like this, it's just like the more you read about this, the more you read his lyrics, and you kind of let yourself kind of absorbed into the music, and you start noticing that the music, the Edge is a fantastic guitarist. He's not technically brilliant, but he's probably one of the best guitarists as far as like making sound that's so unique and so good for the band. And then that's the thing, is that Ringo often gets slighted as he's a crappy drummer. He's not even the best drummer in the Beatles. I think John Lennon may have said that. But he knows that you don't have to be flashy to get your point across. You just have to fit the music well, and Ringo did a very good job of that. And I think The Edge does even a better job of that with his guitar. It's just, he's perfect for U2. And in fact, I would say that he is U2. Him and Bono. Obviously, the other guys probably... I don't know what the songwriting experience is like. I don't know what role that they play. Obviously, if they wanted to trade up, could trade up. So they obviously fit some sort of... they fill something integral to U2. It's just that we on the outside don't hear it as much as we hear Bono and we hear The Edge. And I just started looking, and I was thinking, I started making a list. I made a list of about 15 to 20 songs, and I don't know. I'm not going to talk about them all. I'm already 20 minutes in, so it's fine. But I was just thinking, I'm going through this list, and of all the great songs that I really, really love, there are two on this song that actually are well-known songs by them. If you are if you're aware of them, you have listened to them, you will have heard Both the Blue Sky and Until the End of the World. The rest of them, I don't even think they get played on tours. I did hear one of my favorite songs by them was Ultraviolet, and when my wife and I saw them in Buffalo, it was the 30th anniversary tour of Joshua Tree, and we were in the nosebleed section at the I don't know the Ralph. It's not exactly in Buffalo, just outside, and as goofy as Bono is, and people kind of roll their eyes at him, he has a way with words that I don't think anybody of his generation can say that they even meet. Then again, there are some songs where I love the music, but the lyrics are fucking atrocious. There's a song called 11 O'Clock Tick Tock that they played, this very early song of theirs. I love the music. The words are meaningless. And some of the songs, they do have meaning. Not this one. This one just, it's a difficult listen, but I really, Edge just outdoes himself on this one. It's not a very difficult song to play. It's just a great, this is very typical of his sound. So I guess a couple other ones that, I'm going to wrap it up here, but there are two of the later songs. I would say later. One was on 2000. I actually don't have the album up here. I think there was one on All You Can't Leave Behind called When I Look at the World, and it's pretty religious. And I don't know exactly if he's talking about God or talking to God, but it's just, he bears his soul out there. And there's another one called Yahweh. I think it's on the next album, but at the end. And obviously Yahweh being a name for God. And it's a guy crying out to God, why the darkness before the dawn? And to me, like, if you want to, I guess I'll wrap this up by saying that I think U2, as well as some classical music writers, and I know that they didn't write their own lyrics, but something like Ave Maria, there's a few other ones whose names elude me right now, but they do more for evangelization than any book. The music is the best way to get somebody even closer to God, because there is a form of ecstasy that you can experience in music you can't experience on command at any other point in your life. And I think as a teenager, even a preteen, you have a very structured life. You go to school, you do as you're told, and then you get to choose something. But you put on your stereo. I guess kids might not be listening to stereos anymore, but they're still listening to music. And if you choose something that has such a profound experience, it is a religious experience. And in this case, quite literally. I don't know why church or whoever it is that's running these organizations don't focus on music. And I'm not talking about these hokey hymns and things like that. I'm talking about using even just the Bible for 40. How long to sing this song? How long do I have to sing this song before I reach you? Why the darkness? You're crying out to God. These are not just ecstasy, like I feel great. He's using religion to talk about, or this is mostly Bono, but obviously the other guys are okay with it. Drowning Man is a great example of this, where he's crying out to God, "How I'm drowning," all of these songs are cries for help, And it's not about falling in love. It's about trying to cope and reaching for the divine. And nobody's even come close to as good of an experience of that, in my mind, without being corny. Um, like some people might say they're corny. They are at times, but when they're honest, they're so honest. There's nothing insincere about them, and that's why I really love them. Sometimes the music just doesn't do it for me, but when it does, oh my god, it's just amazing. So I've never felt closer to kind of leaning towards religion than when I listen to you two, when I read Dante. These are sort of on the surface, or sort of on the periphery of the religion, and I honestly think that if any Christian happens to be watching this, do something like that rather than just throw a Bible at me and hope for the best. It doesn't work. You have to fire somebody's soul up, and music is the best way to do that. So anyway, I'll try to keep it light next time. So I'll see you later.